Hello and welcome to this special webisode of OA On Air. I'm Cosmo Macero from 7 Letter in Boston, along with 7 Letter founding partner David D. Martino in Washington. David, we're going to talk about football today. During the past week, a lot of explosive NFL-related news. We haven't even got to the Super Bowl yet. Tom Brady appeared to make his retirement official, and very notably in his initial announcement, snubbed all of New England. And then former Miami Dolphins coach Brian Flores sued the NFL, the Dolphins, and 2 other teams, alleging a pattern of discriminatory hiring practices. It's a lot to talk about. We've got a great guest, thankfully.
That's right, Cosmo. The last couple of weeks have been like the last 2 minutes of that Chiefs-Bills playoff game. So much happening, every twist and turn. We're glad to be joined today by ESPN journalist Seth Wickersham, who's also the best-selling author of It's Better to Be Feared, the New England Patriots Dynasty and the Pursuit of Greatness. We certainly couldn't have picked a better guest to talk about all of this. Seth Wickersham, thanks for taking the time to join us.
Great to see you guys. Thank you.
Seth, just because you spent so much time over the years getting to know Tom Brady, speaking with him a lot, interviewing him and people around him, can you just give us your first impressions or insights into what his thought process was around this announcement? I called it a retirement announcement, but I don't think he mentioned the word retirement, but essentially that's what it looks like to be.
Yeah, it was interesting that he didn't use the word retirement. And, he and Alex Guerrero, his body coach, who's obviously done a lot for him in his career and his life, and has also gotten himself in some controversy over the years. They would often talk over the years about how in some cultures, the word retire doesn't even exist. You just do what you love to do until you don't. And I think that that's kind of what Tom did. As vocal as he's been about playing until he's age 45, and even this past year talking about playing to 50, 55, I think that there was always a good likelihood that this would be it. The first thing was that when he left New England, he signed a 2-year contract. And I think that that wasn't an accident. I think that that's kind of what maybe his family was going to allow. I don't know that for sure, but I think that those things are often negotiated with the family as much as they're negotiated with the team. And I think that as this year went on, even though he did redo his contract in the offseason, I think a lot of that was for salary cap purposes. But I think as this year went on, he started to speak of some of his other ventures, his other businesses that this year he's really embraced more than any other year, with the same type of reverence for football that he has had for football. And I think that, for instance, his Brady brand, his fitness line, I think that he likes the potential of it as a global brand, maybe wrapped into his TB12 business. You can kind of have this all-encompassing Brady experience with your body and your fashion. And also, the game of football is hard. And he's made it look so easy for so long that we forget how hard it is. And really, he's the only person who knows how hard it is to play that well at age 44. And it's a taxing sport. I think that his body was more beat up than he'll ever admit publicly. I think that the Bucs are about to undergo a roster change, and he'd have to start over with a lot of new players. I think that the Bucs aren't as buttoned up as the Patriots were, and while he left New England to find a different system and find a different culture and style of play, the Patriots were buttoned up to the nth degree, and you watch how they lost that playoff game against the Los Angeles Rams in the final seconds. Letting Cooper Kupp be isolated on a safety is something Bill Belichick would have never allowed to happen. I just think that all these things came into focus, and I think it's the reason why it's time for him now.
Fascinating. We could probably do a 10-part Man in the Arena series just on this past weekend in Tom Brady. But as you were talking, you were right. That last point about Bruce Arians, I thought, I was just having this conversation this morning with my partner, Eric, that, that moment was probably for Brady, like, okay, we just went through 17, 18 games, took beatings, overcome injuries, and that's what happens in the last 10 seconds of a football game. And I think that played a big factor in his decision making. But let me ask you this. his statement, artfully crafted, doesn't mention retirement. Do you think it was a miscalculation on his part? In the context of New England, there's the team, there's the coach, and then there's the fans.
Mm-hmm.
And the fans spent the last 20 years defending Tom Brady, defending everything he did, from everything. Deflate Gate, the fans in New England never wavered. They defended him. And then for them to experience that 2 years after the departure moment that they all endured too, do you think it was a miscalculation on his part in the context of not recognizing the fans and what that does long term for his brands that he's trying to launch here? Yeah,
it's a great question. I mean, when he left New England, I think there was just a lot of raw feelings on his side. I mean, let's flash back for a second to August of 2019. Patriots have won their 6th Super Bowl, over the Los Angeles Rams. And Brady wants a contract, as he had asked for the past couple of years, actually, that would be a show of faith, pay him at a fair market value and be a multi-year deal that, was a show of faith that he can keep this going until he's in his mid 40s at a high level. And Robert Kraft and Bill Belichick should have been the more than anybody else, they should have been the people who know better than to ever underestimate Tom Brady. And yet that's what they did. And they were more comfortable with going with him year to year. So in August of 19, Brady's so frustrated with the way the contract negotiations are going, he almost leaves training camp. They agreed to a 1-year deal that allows him to be an unrestricted free agent at the end of the year. And 48 hours after that, he and Gisele Bündchen put their Boston area house on the market. And so he said publicly that he thought that he was done, playing in New England right then. And I think that while Tom Brady forgives, I don't think he forgets. And, I think that there's he's one of the most ruthless competitors you'll ever meet. And I just don't think that the fact that the Patriots opened the door for him to leave and he ended up walking out of it was something that healed very quickly.
Seth, did that backstory though really? I mean, it seems like it infiltrated or infected the process of him. This one moment of a goodbye, and I get that he spent these 2 sort of remarkable seasons in Tampa Bay, and they won a championship, and they had a terrific season this year. And there's as a player, he's got a relationship with the fan base there, but it still felt surprising to me, and I think the majority of Patriot Nation, that he would allow those feelings, that backstory with Coach Belichick and the team, to disrupt that moment where it seemed very obvious how you would handle it. And I know in the time since the initial announcement on Instagram, he has followed up with some other things, but I don't know if it's damaged, but I think the impact has been had already.
Well, it became almost, we kind of had a preview that he was going to retire, right? In early January, I predicted that he was actually going to retire. It wasn't a report; it was just a prediction that I made public. And Adam Schefter and Jeff Darlington, the weekend of the Rams game, reported that he was non-committal towards returning to the Bucs. Then they report that he's retiring. Obviously, that weekend ends up being a storm where there's a lot of pushback. They held firm because they knew that he was always going to announce it on Tuesday morning. And then when he finally did it, it was surprising that he did it. But then the fact that he didn't mention the Patriots or Boston or the fans became this complete other sideshow that almost, depending on, I guess, where you are in the world, where you are in the country, was either at the surprise of that level or maybe even eclipsed it. Look, he posted 9 slides or whatever it was on Instagram. It was obviously a statement he's been spending a lot of time thinking about, probably had people read before he put it out. And I don't think that it was an oversight that he failed to mention anything Boston related. But, that said, he put out a video today that clearly reflects positively on his Patriot years. And I think that I just think it's obvious he doesn't define himself just as a Patriot anymore.
I think that's right. Yeah, for the last 2 years, I've been one of those Patriots fans that's both a Patriots fan and a Brady fan. I was pulling for the Bucs in the Super Bowl. I wanted him to win a Super Bowl in Tampa Bay, just to demonstrate like the true level of greatness that the man can achieve in the context of like the criticisms he's faced over the years. I think it was a redemption for him, and very important in the arc of his career. But to that end, I think on Monday or whenever the announcement came out, it was a Tuesday.
Mm-hmm.
I tweeted that Patriots fans were overreacting on the statement that he will eventually do the right thing for New England. Everybody should just calm down. I'm not so sure that tweet is as predictive as it was more, hopeful. But I hold out hope that he'll eventually, do the right thing. But getting, so moving to next steps here, what do you think happens? Does he do the one-day contract and retire as a Patriot? So he's in the Hall of Fame, in that context, or what else do you think he might have up his sleeve as far as, rebuilding his relationship with the fans in New England?
I don't know. I mean, I really don't. When the Patriots played the Bucs in early October, I think that it was Robert Kraft who came out and kind of intimated that maybe he would, retire a Patriot, sign one of those one-day deals. And I think that even at his press conference, Brady seemed receptive to it. Now I really don't know. I really don't. But time forgives everything. And I think that, when he's in Boston or has a chance to address Patriot fans, I think that he'll probably say something that seems pretty sincere about how much he appreciates them. And, we'll see. But I think that it is amazing to think, what a career we just saw. And, he's retiring as an incredibly singular figure. He's not just a New England Patriot. He's not just a Tampa Bay Buck. He's Tom Brady. And it's hard to think about other quarterbacks, Hall of Fame quarterbacks, ones who are incredibly accomplished, in the same context to his accomplishments. I think that the most interesting thing about him is that, like, when what we're losing when we lose him is like, there's an element of certainty that we're losing. It's a feeling that for the longest time, he was his kind of own unique force, right? I mean, there was no question that when the game was on the line, or it's third down, or if the quarterback had just thrown an interception and got the ball back and, needed to make up for whatever points they might have lost, or there was 2 minutes left in the Super Bowl, he was the guy who you wanted the ball in the hands of. And he was such a unique force that he didn't only win games, it's almost like he forced teams to lose them. Like, they did these things that were incredibly out of character. Like even his final game where they lose to the Los Angeles Rams, and he helped lead this comeback from 27-3. First of all, he's the only quarterback ever who could be down 27-3 in the third quarter, and you're like, this thing's not over. We can't turn this off. And second of all, it's like the Rams just imploded. Like it's like they all just try to give him the game when we all know that he's the one person in NFL history you cannot give a second and third chance to, because he will not let it be taken away. And, we're losing that feeling. And I think that'll be interesting. It'll be weird to be a football fan and watch football next fall without him playing, because there's really nobody else who occupies that space.
Thanks. It's so funny because you're talking about the Rams game. I was just looking at my text, and in the middle of the third quarter, I texted my friend George Rakes, who lives down the street, and we smoke cigars together in my garage. And I texted him and said, I'm going out to the garage to watch the comeback before the comeback, because that I knew, like, this game is not over until it's actually over. And then when it was over, I was like, I can't believe it ended that way. But
yeah,
it's so true, the era of like certainty of him being able to do that. But going back to what you were saying before, let me I assume you've seen Bill Belichick's statement about Tom Brady, which I thought was somewhat out of character for Belichick to be so ebullient, I guess, in a statement like that. And going back to what we were talking about previously, I think this is the road back, right? Belichick issuing a statement about his career. We're seeing some fence mending somewhere. Do you think that will play into as a factor into this, the Belichick-Brady relationship, if that statement kind of addresses some of the lingering questions there?
I don't know. When Brady left New England, he did it at Robert Kraft's house. It was March of 2020, and they called Belichick to tell him. He wanted to see Belichick in person. Belichick was unavailable. Again, Brady kind of thought that was maybe indicative of where their relationship was. It turned out Belichick was out of the country. But on that call, Belichick, and I reported this in my book, just said, you're the best the league's ever seen. And when Brady left New England, he called him the greatest quarterback of all time. And this past year, Brady, he said really complimentary things about Brady. Obviously called him the greatest player in the history of the game in that statement. I think that when you're playing for Belichick, he is ruthless and he will not let up. I mean, it wore on everybody there, and it wore on Tom Brady. The year that they ended up beating the Falcons in the Super Bowl, their first playoff game was against the Houston Texans in Foxborough, and Brady didn't play well. I think he threw 2 interceptions, completed less than 50% of his passes, I think, and Belichick just lit into him in the team meeting after that. We're going to get beat if we play this way. And I mean, at that point, Brady had won 4 Super Bowls. That style is just what, the success of Belichick's style has been reaffirmed over and over and over again. It doesn't mean that it's easy. And the next year, remember, Brady thought about leaving New England very hard, skipped the entire offseason program. His wife told Robert Kraft, enough of this, Johnny effing Foxborough High, stuff from Belichick. It's getting old. He needs to be treated like who he is, which is like the greatest quarterback ever. But that said, and I think that when he left New England, it's like he went from Harvard to Florida State, right? He went to an atmosphere that was just different. And he wanted that for his last couple of years. But when Belichick's best players have left, he's always been incredibly complimentary of them, often going into long sort of speeches and explanations that detail the finer points of the things that they did well that maybe most fans wouldn't notice. I would love to hear him do that about Brady, go on a good 10-minute riff, but that's what Bill does. And I think that, there's a lot of love in that relationship. I'm not sure there's always a lot of like, but I think there is a lot of love and mutual respect, because Belichick not only gave Brady a chance, but they invested a lot in him. All the coaches spending the offseason trying to find ways to help him improve, work on weaknesses. Scott Pioli was part of that. Charlie Weiss was part of that. Ernie Adams was part of that. Josh McDaniels was part of that. And Bill Belichick was part of that. They helped him maximize his potential quite a bit. And I don't think Brady will ever forget that. And I think he appreciates that quite a bit.
Yeah. It's funny. As a fan, a lifetime fan, season ticket holder for many years, I find it very, very difficult to think that, and I was one of those fans, I can't believe he did this. He completely blew off New England. You can't erase, you forget about 1 championship, 2, 4, 6. You can't erase 20 years of unbelievable memories and just forget about it as a fan and allow, a snub, perceived or not, to ruin that. You shouldn't. I don't think you should as a fan. As far as Belichick and Brady, I that relationship is built on something that probably the three that I certainly probably couldn't understand. Seth, you probably do much better than the average person from the work you've done and the relationship you've built professionally with Brady. But I a few years ago, I took my son to the Hall of Fame induction ceremonies in Canton because Randy Moss was being inducted, along with Ray Lewis, who doesn't shut up when he talks. But it was a great experience, and it was amazing because the history of Randy Moss and the Patriots is this tremendous sort of satellite or shooting star, that a magical season that was kind of the first season my son was a fan of football as a kid. And then after that, it sort of petered out and didn't end perfectly. But I'll tell you, on stage during his speech the entire time in the back, there was Coach Belichick, there was Robert Kraft. They probably took the helicopter in or whatever and took off afterwards. But they were there for him because that one season plus was so special. I can only imagine how the two of them and all of the Patriots organization are going to treat Tom Brady and feel when that moment comes.
Absolutely. And, Bill Belichick and Tom Brady are two very different people, but they have a couple essential qualities in common that I think help them, thrive for so long. And they came into each other's lives in 2000, and that was a very vulnerable and critical time because each of them were similarly obsessed with being great in this game that neither of them could control. And both had seen how fragile greatness and even having a job in that profession could be. Remember, Coach Belichick in 1995 sees his personal and professional life annihilated when the Browns moved to Baltimore, has to wait 5 years for another chance, and then goes 5-11 his first year in New England and starts the season 0-2 in 2001. He drafts Brady, who almost went undrafted. That career, he wasn't joking when he pulled out his resume a couple of years ago and was like, I was starting to think I was going to have to use this. And his dad, Tom Sr., had prepared a speech for him that he thought that, he might have to deliver on the last day of the draft. And it was a really heartfelt speech. And it was about how he had learned this from another parent whose daughter played softball years earlier, like Tom Sr.'s. And he said, athletic careers always come to an end. Sometimes they come to an end in middle school, sometimes in high school, sometimes in college, sometimes after a couple of years in the pros, and sometimes after a Hall of Fame career, but they all come to an end. And just because an athletic career ends doesn't mean that it's the end of the world. And of course, he didn't have to give him that speech. And of course, he never did. 22 years later, I wonder if he ended up, giving his son a version of that the other day. I kind of doubt it, but you never know.
We're talking to Seth Wickersham, ESPN journalist and best-selling author. Seth, just real quick, because it has taken over the NFL news in the last couple of days, is the Brian Flores lawsuit. He has spoken quite a bit in the last few days on sports media, ESPN and elsewhere. It appears that it's the kind of thing that could have some kind of a transformative effect on the NFL, but it's probably too early to tell. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it was a courageous move by Brian Flores. Remember, he's still trying to get jobs as of now when we're recording this. The New Orleans Saints and the Houston Texans are still considering him for the head coaching job, and he wants that job. He wants to be a head coach. Obviously, he's made some severe allegations of sham interviews, of accusations of being incentivized to lose by Stephen Ross, the owner of the Dolphins, by Stephen Ross, the owner of the Dolphins, encouraging him to tamper with a potential quarterback. A lot of people think that's Tom Brady. And everybody involved has denied the accusations that he makes in that suit. He's well represented. That said, the onus is on the accuser, not on the accused. And I think that no matter what you think about his lawsuit, it is embarrassing for anybody who covers the NFL, and certainly for people who are involved in the NFL, to have a game that is so predominantly African-American, proudly African-American, and have so few African-American head coaches. There are more minority coaches, obviously you think of Ron Rivera, Robert Saleh in New York, but owners and GMs are not making enough headway in terms of hiring Black head coaches. And there's been a little bit of improvement this year, diversity-wise, in the GM ranks. I know the league office especially Executive Vice President Troy Vincent, is on teams all year long, not only about diversity in terms of coaching hires, but also even going down to like interns. It's something that he takes a lot of pride in and has worked very hard to help make better. But it's an embarrassing situation. And, you know, maybe maybe litigation and the threat of more litigation will fix it, help to fix it. I think we can only hope that that's the case. You'd also hope there's not a backlash due to that. But we'll just see how it plays out. I know, you know, Brian Flores, like many head coaches, can be an abrasive personality, but he was very well respected in New England. I wrote about it in my book where in the fall of 2016, remember right before the presidential election, Donald Trump reads a letter that Bill Belichick had written for him. And Belichick explained it publicly and then kind of moved on. And a lot of the players were very offended by that. And they thought about boycotting practice because Belichick had, you know, closely aligned himself with someone that they thought was divisive, to say the least. And it was Brian Flores who went to Coach Belichick and was like, Coach, you need to know this isn't okay. You know, you need to go talk to the players about this. This is a problem. And, you know, that was a courageous thing to do. It's not easy to do to a man of Bill Belichick's stature in New England, especially the week of, you know, that was the week they played the Seattle Seahawks in Foxborough, maybe the biggest game of the season that year. And it was a big move. And I think that a lot of people, a lot of players respect Brian Flores, you know, as a coach and as a man.
Seth, I heard former New York Jets GM Mike Tannenbaum say yesterday that the league really needs to do a better job, teams, and he feels this is the right strategy to bring more diversity into the league, into teams at the entry level, and not just, he didn't just mean assistant coaching jobs. He meant at the entry level, getting people to start their careers early in life in that field with the NFL. And that's how you really change the culture and create opportunity. And it made a lot of sense. I don't know how well the league is doing in that regard, but it seems to be at least one strategy that makes sense over the long term.
I agree. And I think that that's one of the things that, you know, Troy Vincent's definitely trying to do with teams. In terms of the league office, I do think that there's been an effort to diversify, to be more diverse, you know, especially the past, you know, 5-6 years, I think. But, you know, I think that, you know, Mike Tannenbaum is correct. And, you know, the problems that the NFL as a corporate entity, the league office is facing are the same problems that a lot of corporate America is facing and trying to rectify. But it's not happening fast enough, I think.
On this point, the Rooney Rule, do you think it's a tool that has backfired on the NFL at this point, or was its intentions pure to begin with?
Well, I don't know if you could say it's backfired. I think that it's a rule, and as it's written, I think its intent is pretty clear, but it's a rule, not a law. And there's no question that sham interviews take place. Were all of Brian Flores' interviews that he discusses sham interviews? I don't know that. But, you know, I think especially on the coordinator level, there's a lot of interviews that take place to satisfy the Rooney Rule, to help candidates who aren't going to get the job get their name out there for future opportunities. But that's insulting. And, you know, again, these are complicated and difficult problems. We all know that when job openings come open, whether it's with teams or anyone else in corporate America, often there are favorites for that job, right? They may not, you know, have given the job away to someone, but they have someone that they think they want to hire. And, you know, that happens a lot in the NFL. I don't know how you get out of that. You know, I really don't, because there are a lot of qualified coaches, both that are Black, both that are other minorities, other races, and that are very qualified that are just not getting jobs. I mean, Doug Peterson, head coach of the Philadelphia Eagles, is not going to get a job this cycle. He's got the best resume of any head coaches who were interviewed this cycle. He beat the Patriots in the Super Bowl. It's a big problem. And, like I said, I hope that, the accusations that Brian Flores, for his sake and for this cause's sake, make in that lawsuit are true. And I hope that it leads to some change.
Thanks. We're joined by Seth Wickersham of ESPN.com. Seth, just a couple more questions, if you don't mind. Wanted to have talk a little bit about the media's role in many of these stories that we've been talking about this afternoon. Obviously the most high-profile media intervention in the course of history in the last week was the breaking news from Adam Schefter and others about Tom Brady's retirement. Cosmo and I work in the political realm where the use of leaks and exclusives is usually a tactic to advance a political agenda. And so we're used to that. And Cosmo was a former journalist who, used to do that kind of stuff. How do you think in the context of a retirement story, a story that, Tom Brady, and by all rights, should have been able to control himself as a journalist, what's your take on, the Brian Flores story is a breaking news story. You want to get that out, but like Tom Brady's retirement, like, is that something you want to ruin, for the person who's part of that? That ruin is I didn't mean to use that term. I didn't say that they ruined it, but I understand their position. But like, are there areas where sometimes it's better to wait, even though it's coming?
I mean, Adam and Jeff are so plugged in, and there's a lot of conspiracy theories going around about how they found out about that. I think that the most likely one, I haven't spoken to either of them about it, but I think the most likely one is that they worked really hard and they're really good at their jobs. And again, the past month and a half, I mean, people who are in that orbit saw this coming and knew that it was realistic. Again, it wasn't a report, but I had a hunch that he was going to retire, and I put it in an ESPN.com predictions column. The week before, or the day before, weekend of, when the Bucs played the Rams, Jeff and Adam report that he's been non-committal about returning. They're in the news business, and whether they preempted Tom's own announcement, I'm sorry. I mean, their job is to bring fans inside the news of what's going on in the world of pro football as best they can. And that's a big story. And I don't think they have to apologize to anybody.
Yeah, I don't either. And I didn't mean to imply that they did. It's just a fascinating kind of dynamic. I get, like, you want to break the news about the lawsuits and, things like that. And, but this one was just like, I don't know. Obviously, Brady didn't expect it, and then what we didn't talk about was the Jim Gray podcast the night before he announced what he said he hadn't made his decision. All of this is so, like, for people who work with media and try to manage narratives, like, it's been so back and forth. It's been fascinating to watch, and we appreciate your insight.
Yeah, it was a weird couple hours. I mean, I think that when they broke the story, again, I think we saw this coming, and yet it was still a surprise to see that story. And then the pushback was fierce. And even though, reading between the lines, knowing some of the people who did the pushing back, you kind of say, hey, he hasn't told us anything. Didn't undermine the essence of what they were reporting, which is that he was, his retirement was imminent. He had played his last game, and we know how this ends. Then, of course, he retires Tuesday morning, and, that starts it all up again after days of kind of Brady tributes and whatnot, kicks it all up again. And then by the end of the day, Brian Flores' lawsuit is the biggest story in sports, knocks Tom off the page. And oh, by the way, we also have the Super Bowl coming. And these two teams that are playing, we almost like forgot that they're still here because these were such big stories to cover. It's just amazing how, you know, the thirst for NFL coverage and insight is second to none. And, you know, the NFL can take over many news cycles at any given moment, even if it's not news that the NFL wants out there.
Yeah, I think that as opposed to say 20 years ago, maybe even 10, the the constant exposure from every side that the consumer has to different types of media, whether it's uh, uh, on their smartphone, social media, traditional TV and broadcast radio, and everything else in between, it has really made the consumer very, very sophisticated into about the thing that David referenced, the process of trying to manage a narrative. It's a lot more difficult to manage a narrative when the consumer understands what you're trying to do, and just the layperson knows, oh, look at this. Now Brady's going to have to unwind this. Now he's going to have to explain, or this looks like he stepped on the playoff weekend. All those things that moved at a much slower pace some years ago and had to be thought through to unwind. It happens in seconds because the consumer understands what's going on. I think that makes it even more challenging, and in this case, a lot more fascinating too.
Yeah, you watch a lot of things unfold in real time, and that's just not the way it used to be. So yeah, it's the experience of news and consuming news has changed so much. It's fascinating.
Seth Wickersham of ESPN. One last question. I want to go back to the book. It's prominently featured behind you. And you've probably been asked a million questions about this. And so I'm going to ask one that maybe, hopefully no one has asked you yet, which is there anything in the book you haven't been asked about that you're surprised? Why isn't anybody paying attention to this? Because this is a really interesting news nugget.
Man, that's a good question. I got asked quite a bit about it. I mean, I think that the thing that I'd really tried to do with the book, and what I hope makes it a good experience for readers, is that yeah, there's fights in it, and yes, there are cuss words, and there is cheating, and there's some things in there that get kind of buzzy headlines. But the book itself is about greatness and how this greatness was achieved, what the DNA of it was, and what some of the costs of it were. And if you do read the book, and you especially read the last third of it, you see a lot of the themes coming up. The cost of Tom Brady's fierce dedication to playing football indefinitely, and the strain that has on his family, because it's all encompassing. There is no off switch. He told me that there is no off. I once asked him if he had a backup plan. If football doesn't work out, what are you going to do? He was like, no, I don't. I've never had one. And I was like, do you have one now? And he goes, no, absolutely not. And he just couldn't ever allow himself to work this way. And I do think that, even though he was always going to retire Tuesday morning, I do wonder if that podcast with Jim Gray, he couldn't bring himself to say it, whether he was actually telling the truth in a way that he hadn't decided, because maybe he was still, thinking of that 1% chance that he was going to pull a U-turn and head right back to the Bucs for treatment, for some film work, and talk about the off-season schedule. It's just been so essential to his being, essential to his self-identity, probably his confidence. He's spoken about the need for a therapist when he walked away, because he knew that there was no way he was going to be able to fill this void. And I think that's really what it is. It's a void. But again, I think it's one of the reasons why you saw these other business endeavors, especially come up this past season. And I think he's going to dive into those pretty strongly, mostly living in Miami, maybe a little bit in New York. And we'll see how long that sustains him. With these legends, with these guys who would give away all their money to go back and play the sport, those outside endeavors, the private jets, the cushy paid speeches, the endless, rounds of golf on the world's best courses, it does get old. Michael Jordan, my friend Wright Thompson wrote a Michael Jordan story a couple of years ago when he was watching LeBron James play basketball and talking about how he would defend him, knowing that if he could just go back in time, he could own LeBron. John Elway, obviously, walks away, best ending you could possibly think of for him. And a couple of years later, he's general manager of the team, grinding away, sweating through games every week because he just kind of knew that he felt most alive with that game in his life. I just don't see Tom Brady getting into, media broadcasting. He's never going to do that. He's going to do what he chooses. But I do think that at some point, something competitive will have to be part of his daily life. And it's, business is competitive, but as you guys know, business, it takes a while. It's not the immediate 3 hours on a Sunday that gives you a test. You either passed or you failed. I do think that at some point he's going to need something that will get those competitive juices flowing again. I'm just not sure what form that'll take.
All right, Seth, thank you. The book is It's Better to Be Feared, The New England Patriots Dynasty and the Pursuit of Greatness. Best-selling author Seth Wickersham, ESPN journalist. Thanks so much for joining us, Seth. It's been a terrific conversation.
Hey, thank you, guys.
Thanks, Seth.
Thank you for listening to this episode of OA on Air with your hosts, 7-letter partners Cosmo Macero and David D. Martino. We hope you enjoyed our conversation on all things Tom Brady and the current state of the NFL with ESPN senior writer and New York Times best-selling author of It's Better to Be Feared, The New England Patriots Dynasty and the Pursuit of Greatness, Seth Wickersham. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support our podcast, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share on your social media. If you wish to be notified about upcoming episodes, subscribe to OA on Air on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and follow us on LinkedIn at O'Neill & Associates.